So to create the curve network for our undervest, we're going to use the Topology brush. The Topology brush is a manual retopology tool that's in ZBrush in the brush menu. If you just select it, what it actually does is it allows you to draw a curve network on the surface of the model. And every time you've got four curves intersecting, creating the outline of a 4-point quad, you'll end up with a polygon built there by ZBrush. So I'm just going through right now and building sort of the most basic framework of the arm holes, the neck hole, the center line, just roughing in the generalized shape of this character, or of this costume element, I should say. You see that I can actually continue a stroke as long as I start from that little white circle at the end and then carry on. I can continue that stroke just by clicking it again and then dragging like I did just there. You want to make sure that your curves are meeting at the center line and at the endpoints of each other. Otherwise, you're going to end up with polygons not generating. So just be careful with that. So in just a moment, you'll see I will create a quad here. I will drag a line across, and then there it tries to generate a quad, but it doesn't quite work right, which we'll need to go back and fix. So as I continue down here, you see that it starts generating proper geometry. There's another quad there that's drawing correctly, and we'll bring that line down and create one there. Now I'll continue another line straight down, and that basically slices through that quad, or that series of quads, and adds another edge. Now, if I want to delete, I'll just Alt-click and drag a stroke across an existing stroke, and then that will delete those strokes like I did here. I'm just going to need to go in here and manually rebuild that center line and the continuation off towards the shoulder. Sometimes it can get a little bit tricky when you're dealing around the center line. You might need to just delete and rebuild those areas as they come up. And here I will just continue drawing quads, filling out the chest area and the top of the torso. So the topology brush is pretty cut and dried. It's very, very simple. You just draw the topology as you want it to appear. I use this to lay out a basic polygon network that I'll then turn into a separate piece of geometry, which we will then, in just a moment, start detailing up into this mechanical vest that you see as the lowest part of the character's costume. It's easier, I think, to build on something like this than it would be just to do a mesh extraction in this case, because I just feel like it gives me just a little bit more control. I will sometimes use mesh extractions as well. It's completely dependent on just exactly what I'm trying to get out of that particular piece of geometry. In this case, the topology brush just gives you perfect control over wherever each polygon and each edge is going to go. Here again, you can see I'm rebuilding that area from the center line out just because it's giving me a little bit of trouble. You can see there's more than 4 points there, which is why that's not building. Again, I'm just going to have to delete that and rebuild. So here we've generated our 3D geometry based on the topology brush network. What I'll do is I will isolate visibility for just the vest, and then I will go to my geometry, modify topology, and delete hidden. That topology is just built on a proxy object. I just made a duplicate of the body and deleted the subdivision levels and built on top of that. That's why I'm able to just delete that buck, and then I've still got my sculpted geo there in the subtool stack. So here I'm just using the move brush to shape this, and I just want to give you sort of a time-lapse view of how I went about using masking and edge looping, specifically group loops, as well as masking and some brushes to just create a hard surface look to this vest. So here I'm just using the move brush to sort of shape that base geometry for the breastplate, getting the most fundamental form in place and starting to add some subdivision levels. I'm going to be using group loops as well as some of the planar brushes and just general sculpting tools to create this sort of hard surface underlayer of the costume. So the first thing that I want to do is just get everything sort of fitting together with the other parts of the costume, so I don't want anything sort of crashing or interpenetrating between each other. So I've just turned on visibility for everything, and I'm just using the move brush to shape the stuff. And here I'm just going ahead and using some of the brushes here to mask out areas that I want to create panels from. So I'm just creating a mask, and then from this mask I will create polygroups, and then from those polygroups we will create group loops. So just using the mask, I'm creating these panel areas, just isolating them. And here I'll just use a marquee to make a little square, and then I will polygroup based on masking. So you can see I've got polygroups now for each of those individual masked areas. Now what I'll do is I will polygroup everything but those masked areas. So I've just got two polygroups, and then I'll come in and I will use group loops from under the geometry menu. And you see that that actually cuts edge loops around each of those masked polygrouped areas, and it gives us a nice sort of easily extrudable shape. And then by isolating the polygroup loop, I can deepen that ravine and just sharpen the appearance of those individual pieces. Now I'm just trying to use the inflate slider under tool deformation just to kind of create more of a rounded edge to those particular panels there. I'm just trying to create kind of an interesting look to the just the greebling and the detailing on this particular piece. Now at this stage I'm using one of the multi-mesh insert brushes to create strapping, and this is actually not even visible in the final piece. I was just having some fun trying to create some interesting details on the vest, and it made sense that there would be strapping that would, secure it into place. And it's nice to have that there. You never know if you're going to change your costume, or if it's a situation where something's actually going to be 3D printed or animated. You definitely want to have details underneath the costume in case that particular bit of lapel gets pulled back or the coat shifts. It's nice to have layers of detail going on underneath each bit of costume. Here I'm just using a brush with one of the lazy mouse strokes to kind of create a nice sort of hard edge seam there. I just want to create a real sense of there being a line of delineation where these two halves of the shell are sort of socketing into each other. And I have stored a morph target here, which is how I'm able to actually erase out elements of that. There you go. That gives me that nice sort of jigsaw puzzle piece interlocking there. And here I'm coming up to the top of the vest, the shoulder portions, and just creating some seam lines that run underneath those straps, just so that there is a real sense of there being a connectivity between these two parts, because no vest could be, created just, especially not a hard surface one, could be created as a single shape. Then there would really be no way to put it on. Here I'm just trying to use the damn standard brush just to sharpen some edges there. There we go. So I really kind of like the look of this. It's a small sort of hard surface bit of armor or utility vest that really does suit the character, and it's going to look really nice once I get the other elements stacked up on top, because we've got two mantles. We have a leather collar, and then we also have a chain mail sort of collar that falls underneath that. And there's actually a bodysuit as well that might not be very easy to see in the illustration, but there's several layers of costume happening here. Here I'm using that inflate slider again, just trying to create a sort of delineation between this oval form and the rest of the shape, and ultimately I just use the smoothing brush just to smooth that back a bit, and then try and inflate that. And here I'm just sort of experimenting with using some of the hard surface brushes. I was thinking about trying to plane out these shapes, but ultimately I find that I like their organic quality more than I like the look of them planed out. So what we do end up doing is going ahead and isolating some more parts of the mask and then creating planes from those, which you'll see in just a moment. Now here you can see that we've isolated some panels using a mask, and once again we're going to polygroup and then group loop those smaller panels. And the idea being here is it allows us to create some nice venting effects. It really gives us a nice hard delineation where those organic forms of the raised panels can then be inset, and it really does feel like a machined or an engineered surface. So ZBrush is actually thinking right now. Just run a process on there that it's got to do some processing on. So here you can see we've isolated these panels here, and I'm just using transpose rotate to actually offset those, and it gives it a really interesting kind of look. It feels like a bit of a vent going in, and then I can do the opposite and then vent these particular panels out or in, depending whichever way that I feel like it looks the most interesting. So that just adds another level of sort of interest and detail to this surface. So I find these to be kind of similar to sort of the fluting that you might see in a car body, or maybe the interior forms of an upholstered surface in a car. It's just these interesting kind of fluted shapes that just really, I couldn't tell you what their technical purpose would be. If you pressed me, I could make something up, but I do know from a form standpoint, I'm using them to break the surface up and create kind of interesting shape. I imagine they might be kind of air intakes or something, part of a cooling system or an air intake system. So now we're going to isolate these particular pieces here, and what I'd like to do is actually go ahead and shrink my visible area just a little bit. And what that's going to do, it's going to add just a little bit of a lip or an edge around the outside. And I'm going to use my planer brush, and I'm going to select a square alpha and then tile that alpha, and that's going to allow me to use the planer brush here to create kind of a venting effect. So you can see here as I drag that out, it gives me a nice air intake look. And that's just the planer brush with the square alpha. I turned up the tiling on it, and just make sure that you drag that depth control down so it's actually pressing into the surface. That's one thing about that planer brush is it's not really going to be visible on most surfaces unless you go into the brush controls and bring that depth slider, that depth control down and embed that down into the surface. There we go, just adding a little bit more venting in here. Just doing what we can to further break up that surface and create some visual interest. So for the most part, that concludes what we're doing on the breastplate. The last step that we want to take is actually using the surface controls to add noise. I want to use the surface controls under the tool menu to create a hex tile pattern in the metallic areas underneath all of these extrusions and greebles that we've added on. That hex tile pattern I find is just an interesting shape. It creates just another level of detail, and it looks like it's part of the Under Armour. It's something you actually see quite a bit lately in a lot of like mech costumes. There's a lot of hex tiles. So what I do is I just isolate with a mask everything but the area that I want to be working with. See that those straps actually at the top have gotten a little bit smooth, so what I'm doing here is probably thinking about deleting those. But the important step at this stage is to just isolate the under shell here and make sure that everything but that is masked. I'll go into the noise menu and go into the noise plug, and now we will select the hex tile, and here you can see if we adjust the sizing of it, we can actually get a really nice looking hex tile pattern. stretching across the surface. And there's no UVs on this. This is actually just a 3D projection. So if you do want to get, a very, very accurate placement, you would have to create UVs. And here you can see that that patterning there is actually not being applied in the unmasked, or in the masked areas, I should say. So I'm going ahead and masking out the areas where I don't want it to appear. So that completes our hard surface costume element, the vest. So you can see how we've used the basic tools of the topology tools, the topology brush and ZBrush, the dam standard and the standard brush, as well as the planar brushes and group loops in conjunction with polygrouping to create a relatively complicated appearing hard surface costume element. Here I'm just using the dam standard brush to go in and sharpen these delineations between the two shelves of the vest. So hopefully this helps clarify some of the steps. There's a whole lot going on here, but it's just the creative use of simple tools to create a complicated shape just by building up multiple layers of simple form. So it's not really that difficult, but I always find it's easier if you can actually see it taking place rather than having it just explained step by step. So hopefully you found this video useful, and I'll see you in the next chapter.